The rain fell hard on the broken land. The ground was covered with smoke, metal, and the smell of fear. Soldiers moved fast through the ruined battlefield, shouting orders and carrying the wounded. But then a new sound echoed, something heavy, something unnatural. A loud growl followed. Like a beast that didn't belong to this world, Captain Ray Carter stopped in his tracks. His hand went to his weapon. But his heart told him something was wrong. He had heard the stories like everyone else. They called it the shell. Some said it was a war machine. Others said it was a cursed alien. But no one really knew. They only knew this thing could tear through tanks like paper. And it never spoke a word. Incoming. The shell is here. Someone screamed over the radio. Soldiers panicked, running in all directions. Ray didn't move. He stepped closer to the edge of the crater where the last explosion had happened. The smoke parted for just a second. There it stood, 10 feet tall, covered in living armor that pulsed like muscle. Its face was hidden by thick plates, but its eyes glowed softly blue. Not red. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It just stood there, staring back at him. Ray raised his weapon slowly, unsure. His finger rested near the trigger. But something about the creature made him stop. The battlefield was silent now, as if time had frozen. Ray took a step forward, and the monster flinched, just slightly. It was afraid. "Why are you hesitating?" he whispered. No answer came, of course, but in that moment, Ray saw something in those glowing eyes, something that did not belong to a killing machine. Sadness, maybe pain, maybe, but not hate. A siren screamed from behind. Backup had arrived. Tanks rolled over the hills, drones flew overhead, all locking onto the target. The shell turned its head, sensing danger, for one more second. It looked back at Ray, then jumped away with shocking speed, vanishing into the ruins. Ray lowered his weapon, confused and shaken. The other soldiers rushed forward, yelling and scanning the area. They were ready to destroy, but the enemy was already gone. Later, in the command tent, officers reviewed the footage. "Still no confirmation on what it is," said the general, pointing at the blurry image. Ray didn't speak. He stared at the screen, zooming in on the glowing eyes. Not wild, not insane, just lost. "You all right, Captain?" someone asked. Ray nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "but that wasn't a monster." He walked out of the tent, the sound of rain tapping on his helmet. He looked toward the mountains where the shell had disappeared. He didn't know what it was or who it was, but one thing was clear: whatever that creature was, it didn't want to kill, not really, and he had seen it, even if no one else had. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of the way it stood still, the way it didn't attack even when it had the chance. And those eyes, they haunted him. He opened his locker and pulled out a photo. It was old, a memory from Earth. His sister, standing in a field of flowers, smiling. "She used to look at me like that," he whispered. "Like she was trapped but trying to be brave." Was it possible that thing had once been someone? He didn't know the answer, but now he had a mission of his own. Not given by the army, not part of any strategy. He needed to find the shell again, not to destroy it, but to understand it. The room was cold and dark, filled with silence and machines that hummed like breathing beasts. In the middle of it sat the shell, a living armor locked in a giant metal pod, pulsing faintly with a sick glow. Inside, she was curled up, her body wrapped in cords, her arms shaking, her eyes wide open, even in the dark. Her name, long forgotten by others, still echoed weakly in her own mind. Kayla. She repeated it like a prayer, as if the name alone could keep her from fading away completely. She remembered things, sometimes. A garden filled with silver trees, the sound of running water, the warm laughter of her mother. But those memories came like dust in the wind, always slipping through her fingers. Now she was something else. Not a healer, not a girl, not even a soldier. She was a weapon, created by force, designed by fear. The scientists didn't speak to her anymore. They spoke around her, over her, as if she were a machine that couldn't understand. "She's still unstable," one said, tapping a screen. "We need a stronger emotional lock before the next deployment," another muttered. Kayla wanted to scream, to say she was still in there, still alive, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep, like a bird in a cage made of shadows. Her heart thumped harder when the commander entered, tall, sharp-eyed, voice cold as stone. He walked up to the pod and stared at her through the glass. "Tomorrow we send you again," he said. "The humans are pushing forward, and we will not lose ground." She didn't blink, didn't move. She couldn't, but inside her fear burned like fire. When they put her back in the battlefield, it always hurt. The armor grew around her like claws, pulling her body apart and stitching it back into something else. She became stronger, faster, unstoppable, but less herself each time. It was the price of survival, her people had said, but it felt more like a curse. No one asked her what she wanted. Not when the first bombs fell on their cities. Not when her village was destroyed. Not when they found her half buried in rubble and offered her a second chance. The shell saved her, yes, but it also stole her in her private moments. When the machines weren't watching, she touched the smooth curve of the armor and whispered softly, "This is not me." Sometimes she dreamed of a boy, a human with kind eyes and no fear. He didn't shout or run. He looked at her and saw something else, something she had almost forgotten: hope. She had seen him on the battlefield. He had aimed his weapon, but he hadn't fired. Their eyes met for only seconds, but it was enough. It stirred something deep inside her, something buried under layers of pain and steel, maybe. Not everyone wanted to kill her, maybe. Someone could still see her. A young alien technician entered the room one night. Quietly, carefully, he was supposed to check the system logs. But instead he walked up to her pod and placed a small flower beside it. It was wilted and broken, but still beautiful. He looked at her through the glass and whispered, "I hope you come back." Then he left, without saying another word. Kayla stared at the flower for hours. It didn't speak, but it reminded her of life. It reminded her that she was not born to destroy. She remembered touching flowers once, healing them with her fingers, making them bloom again. That was the real her, not this thing in the pod. The next day, the alarms blared. The command ordered immediate deployment. "Activate the shell," barked the commander. Kayla's pod filled with green light, wires tightening around her chest, armor growing once again. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. Not a monster, a girl, a name: Kayla. As the shell finished forming around her, she opened her glowing eyes, not with rage this time, but with quiet defiance. She wouldn't kill without reason. She wouldn't forget herself. And if she ever saw that human again, she would not run. She would wait, maybe. He would understand her better than anyone else ever did. The desert wind cut across Ray Carter's face as he stepped away from his unit in the dead of night. He moved like a ghost between the broken metal of old tanks and scorched alien stone. His boots crunched softly over cracked earth, each step pulling him farther from safety. He wasn't following orders anymore. He was following a feeling. No one understood what he saw that day. The others called it luck, said he should have shot when he had the chance. But Ray wasn't so sure. There was something in that creature's eyes. Something no one else had seen. Not rage, not hate, something closer to sorrow. He carried no heavy weapons tonight, only a med kit, rations, and an old photo in his chest pocket. The photo was of his younger sister, long gone now. Sometimes he wondered if that's why he had hesitated, because the creature's eyes reminded him of hers. Scared, but still alive beneath it all. He climbed over a ridge and stopped, looking down into the silent valley. It was the same place they had fought days ago. Wreckage still littered the ground. But now it was quiet, too quiet. Ray waited, not calling out, just standing, letting the night speak first. Hours passed. Then he heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, a soft scraping, like claws dragging gently across stone. He turned his head slowly, heart racing. And there it was, emerging from the darkness like a shadow given life. the shell. It stood halfway between monster and statue, tall, armored, its glowing blue eyes fixed on him once more. Ray raised both hands, not in fear, but in peace. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly. The creature didn't move. He reached into his pouch and slowly pulled out a small piece of wrapped food. He placed it on a flat rock and stepped back. "I brought this, just in case you're hungry," he said, his voice soft and even, still no movement. But its gaze dropped, just briefly, to the food. Then returned to him. Seconds felt like hours. Ray sat down on the dirt, crossing his legs. "I don't know who you are," he continued, "but I think you remember something." The shell tilted its head slightly, like a child trying to understand. A new sound, that tiny motion, made Ray's heart skip. "You could have killed me before," he whispered. "But you didn't." The shell took a slow step forward. Then another. Ray stayed still, hands open, eyes calm. It reached the stone, crouched down, and touched the food with sharp fingers, but didn't eat it. Instead, it pulled something from its chest plate and placed it on the ground. A pendant, old, dusty, but human-made. Ray's eyes widened. He recognized the symbol. It was from a peace mission sent years ago, a failed one. The pendant shouldn't be here, not unless someone had been part of that mission. "You were there," Ray said in awe. The shell's shoulders trembled for just a second, almost too small to notice. He picked up the pendant carefully, brushing off the dirt. "Were you someone we tried to help?" he asked. No answer came, but the creature didn't run. It just stood there, watching him, breathing slowly. Ray stood up, holding the pendant in one hand. "I'll come back," he promised. "I want to understand." The shell turned away and vanished into the night without a sound. But this time, Ray didn't feel empty. He felt like a door had opened, just a crack. Back at camp, no one noticed his absence. No one asked where he went. But Ray couldn't sleep again. He sat with the pendant in his hand, staring at it under the light. He pulled out a report from years ago, Operation Harmony. It listed names, photos, lost souls, and there, buried on page 12, was a girl, Kayla, medical apprentice, age 17, presumed dead. She wore the same pendant in her photo. Ray felt cold. That meant the monster out there was her, not a machine, not a ghost, a girl, turned into something terrible to fight a war she didn't choose. He leaned back in his chair, the wind outside howling like it knew what he had discovered. She had been a healer once. Now she was a weapon. But if even a small part of Kayla was still inside that shell, then maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to bring her back. Not as the shell, but as herself, and Ray would be the one to try. Even if the whole world thought he was crazy. The silence after battle was supposed to bring peace. But inside the alien warbase, silence was a warning. Kayla stood motionless under a spotlight. Thick cables wrapped around her arms, armor cracked from within. She had returned from the field unharmed. Yet something about her behavior set alarms ringing. Her commander paced in front of her like a predator. "You let the human live," he said, voice sharp and bitter. "You were within reach and still you hesitated." Kayla didn't answer. She couldn't, not while the armor still pulsed with control implants and pain signals. But her eyes met his, glowing softly, not in rage, but in defiance. He didn't like that. "You were made for war," he growled, "not for mercy." A technician adjusted a dial, and pain shot through her spine, forcing her knees to buckle. She didn't scream. She never did. Deep inside, past the metal, past the monster, she whispered her name again, Kayla. She refused to let it be taken from her. In the observation room above, young Assistant Brell watched with unease. He was new, barely trained, but even he could feel something was wrong. She was supposed to be their weapon, a mindless force to use and throw away. But there was something human in her posture, in her silence. Not machine-like, just trapped. Later that night, Brell returned alone, the hallway dark and quiet. He looked through the reinforced glass where Kayla was restrained. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Do you still remember who you are?" Her head moved, just slightly. It was enough. He left behind a small item, a hand-drawn picture of a tree. Something from her old village the records mentioned. He placed it on the ground before leaving quickly. Kayla stared at it for hours. She remembered trees, she remembered sunlight, but the next morning, her commander announced the final phase. "The shell is no longer responding properly," he said coldly to the room. "We will increase control pressure and reprogram the emotional layers." "She doesn't need emotions," another agreed. "Only orders." The lab lights turned red. Kayla's restraints grew tighter. They were trying to erase what was left of her. Her mind fought to stay above the waves of commands and burning signals. She thought of the human again, the one who didn't shoot, the one who sat down and spoke like she was real. He had looked into her eyes, and something inside her had warmed for the first time in years. She snapped a cable, then another. Alarms screamed. Scientists shouted. But Kayla didn't stop. She tore herself free, half in armor, half herself. The floor cracked beneath her as she ran through the hallway. Not to fight, not to kill, just to escape. Brel saw her pass by and didn't call for guards. He stepped aside, eyes wide but filled with something close to respect. "She's not a monster," he whispered. Even as the sirens blared behind him, outside, the air was cold and sharp. Kayla ran into the wild, heart pounding, armor shifting. Her own people would call her a traitor now. The humans still feared her. She had no one, nowhere to go, but her. Steps didn't slow, because in her chest burned a fragile, stubborn spark. Someone had seen her. Someone still might again. She would not let them take that from her. As she disappeared into the distant fog, her name echoed in her thoughts louder than ever before. Kayla, not a shell, not a monster Kayla. A branch snapped under his boot, but the sound didn't scare her. She had already heard him coming long before he crossed the ridge. Kayla sat in the shadows of twisted alien trees, wrapped in a broken part of her armor, shivering but silent. The forest was a graveyard, now old metal, rotted drones. Forgotten camps swallowed by vines and time. Ray Carter stepped through carefully, holding nothing in his hands, no weapon, no scanner, just a backpack and his breath. He had followed strange clues, burned footprints too wide for any soldier. Crushed berries, long slashes across trees that looked more like warnings than attacks. But what stopped him cold was the trail of something else. Tears, he found them dried on leaves, caught on sharp branches like tiny pieces of truth. Monsters don't cry, he thought, but girls do. He crouched beside a shallow stream, placing a wrapped meal on a clean stone. Then he waited, not calling her name because he still didn't know if she'd accept it. But in his pocket, he carried the pendant she had left behind, and in his mind, he kept replaying the look she gave him. Not a beast's glare, something soft and scared. Time passed. The wind whispered through the forest, brushing the leaves like a quiet voice, and finally, he heard her, not footsteps, not breathing, just a low sound, like a wounded animal trying not to cry. He didn't move, and then she appeared, just a shape at first, crouched and slow, her glowing eyes dimmer than before. Kayla looked thinner, like the shell was peeling off in pieces. Her claws were cracked, and her armor was bleeding light from invisible wounds. But she didn't run. She watched him the way someone watches a fire, warm but dangerous. Ray raised the pendant and held it out. "I think you dropped this," he said softly. She took a step forward, not answering. Her mouth didn't move, but her fingers twitched, her shoulders tensed. He placed the pendant on a rock and backed away, letting her choose. Kayla stepped closer, slowly, and picked it up. Her hand trembled, but her eyes never left his. Ray sat down again, pulling out another item from his bag, a bottle of water, a bandage, a folded blanket. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said. Not expecting a reply, Kayla blinked slowly, then crouched across from him, her body still half-armored, her face half-hidden. But she didn't look like a monster now. She looked like a girl trying very hard not to fall apart. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. full of questions they couldn't ask and answers they weren't ready to speak. Ray noticed her hands burned, cracked, barely healed. He reached out with the med kit, holding up a simple cloth soaked in clean water. She flinched, then hesitated. Her armor twitched as if deciding whether to allow the touch. He didn't push, just waited. Finally, Kayla extended one hand slowly. He cleaned the cuts gently, without a word, without fear. And in that moment, she closed her eyes. Not because she was tired, but because she was safe. Ray didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask what they did to her. He only said, "You don't have to go back to them." Kayla opened her mouth slightly, like she wanted to speak, but no sound came, only a soft, broken breath. It was enough that night. She didn't run. She stayed near him, curled in the shadows with the blanket wrapped around her fading shell. Ray sat close by, awake and alert, listening to the forest, watching over her. He had come looking for a weapon, a mystery, maybe even a threat. But what he found was a person, one that the world had tried to erase. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, he made a silent promise. He would protect her. He would never see her as a monster again. And slowly, maybe, she would start to believe it too. It started with birds flying away, not in panic, but like they already knew what was coming. Kayla's eyes opened before Ray even heard the first drone buzz through the sky. She didn't speak, but her body tensed, her shell humming faintly with warning. Ray sat up, grabbing his bag and pressing a hand to her shoulder. "What is it?" he whispered, even though he already knew. They had been found. Distant lights blinked between the trees, unnatural and searching. Ray could hear the distant crunch of boots, the rumble of machines closing in. Both sides were hunting now, his own army and hers. Two enemies that had suddenly become one. Kayla stood, armor crawling up her arms like instinct. Her form shifted quickly, claws sharpening, eyes glowing brighter with each breath. But there was fear in her movement. Not rage. She didn't want to fight, not unless she had to. Ray pulled her behind a down shuttle covered in moss. He looked into her glowing eyes and said softly, "I'll fight with you, not against you." She blinked slowly, then nodded. That small nod meant more than words. The first group arrived fast, 3 human soldiers, armed, scanning with visors. They spotted movement and raised their rifles. Ray stepped out first, hands raised, yelling, "Wait, don't shoot." Behind him, Kayla crouched low, silent, tense. One soldier shouted, "Is that the target?" "Step away, Carter." "She's not what you think," Ray said, voice firm. "She's a prisoner, not the enemy. Orders are to terminate," another barked, finger tightening on the trigger. Before they could fire, Kayla launched forward, not to kill, but to disarm. She moved like a ghost, blades flashing but never piercing flesh. She knocked the weapons from their hands and stood over them, silent and breathing hard. The soldiers lay frozen, staring up at her in shock. Ray stepped between them and her, shouting, "Stand down. She just saved your lives." But there was no time to argue. The alien patrol arrived seconds later, flying in low and fast, weapons hot. They didn't ask questions, they opened fire. Kayla grabbed Ray and leapt into the trees, her body moving with power and pain, energy. Blasts tore through the ground behind them, exploding roots and shattering stone. They ran together, ducking, weaving, climbing higher into the cliffs beyond the forest. Ray's lungs burned, and Kayla bled from one shoulder where a bolt grazed her. But they didn't stop at last. They found cover inside a collapsed structure, an old ruin buried deep in the mountains. Edge, they slid behind the thick wall, gasping, the sound of battle fading behind them. Kayla slumped against the stone, breathing fast, her shell flickering. Ray knelt beside her and touched the burned armor around her shoulder. She winced but didn't pull away. He applied a gel from his kit, watching her face soften just a little. "This place," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, broken, but real. Ray froze, staring at her. You can talk." She looked down, ashamed. "Not much," she said slowly. "They ... didn't want me to. Ray felt his throat tighten. They tried to erase you, he whispered. She nodded. But I remember. She added, voice shaking. I remember my name. What is it? He asked, though he already knew. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. Kayla. The word hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ray smiled for the first time in days. You're not alone anymore, Kayla. They sat together in the ruin, the echoes of battle still rumbling outside. But inside, something new had formed. Not trust, not yet, but something like it. Ray glanced around the chamber, noticing the strange. Walls glowing with soft symbols, old tech, ancient, maybe even pre-war. He walked forward and touched one of the glowing lines. It pulsed under his hand, reacting to his skin. Kayla stood slowly, watching him with surprise. That's not from my people, she said. That's older. Ray stepped back as a panel opened in the floor, revealing a buried core full of soft light inside. A faint hum grew louder, tech alive and waiting. I think, Ray whispered, this place might help you. Kayla looked at the core, her expression unreadable. If I step into that, she said, I might not come back out. Ray placed a hand on her shoulder. Then I'll go in with you, he said. Without hesitation, Kayla stared at him, not with fear this time, but with something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The light inside the ancient chamber was not blinding, it was soft, like sunrise through a quiet window. Kayla stood at the edge of the glowing core, her feet trembling, the shell around her flickering like it was unsure if it should protect her or let her go. Ray stood beside her, silent, eyes locked on her face. Not the armor, not the power, just her. She looked into the pulsing center of the chamber and asked without turning, what if I disappear in there? Ray didn't answer with logic or science. He simply said, then I'll wait for you. Her fingers curled slowly, her voice low. I was forced into this shell to fight their war. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Ray nodded, stepping forward with her. Then let's finish. She took the first step, the light climbing up her legs like water, then another, until her whole body was inside the glowing circle. Ray followed without hesitation. As soon as they were both inside, the ground trembled softly, like the world was holding its breath. The old machine woke. It scanned them both, reading not just the body, but the mind. It read pain, memory, identity. It asked no questions. Yet Kayla could feel it touching everything inside her. Images flashed across her mind, her home, her family, her first smile. The scream when she was forced into the armor, the first battle, the moment she almost forgot her own name. But among those, something new glowed brighter. Ray's voice, Ray's eyes, Ray's belief. The machine gave her a choice: to keep the shell and stay powerful, or release it and become herself again. Kayla looked at her claws, her armor, the strength that had kept her alive. Then she looked at Ray, who stood there with no armor, no claws, only trust. She breathed deeply and whispered, I don't want to be a weapon. The light around her changed, growing warmer, softer, and then it cracked. The armor peeled off like stone, melting into ash, layer by layer, falling away without pain. Kayla gasped, her real skin shining beneath the dust. Her voice no longer trapped. Her body, though still marked by scars, was her own again. She stood there, tired, shaking, but free. Ray stepped forward and caught her just as her legs gave out. She didn't fall. He held her, arms strong, eyes gentle. You came back, he said quietly. Kayla smiled, tears rolling down her cheek. You were the only one who saw I was still in here. They left the chamber together, walking into the sunlight as the ruins behind them slowly faded into silence once more. But the world outside hadn't changed. Soldiers still waited, drones still circled, commanders still gave orders. But when Kayla stepped out, not as a monster, but as a girl with glowing eyes and quiet strength, the battlefield paused. Guns lowered, soldiers stared, unsure if they were looking at a threat or a miracle. Ray stood beside her, hand in hers. She's not your weapon, he said to both sides. She's not your enemy. She chose to be more than what you forced her to become. No one moved for a long moment. Then, slowly, Brel, the young alien technician who had once left a flower for her, stepped forward and bowed his head. She was never a monster. He said one by one, others followed, human and alien alike. Not cheering, not shouting, just watching with quiet awe. Kayla looked up at Ray, the wind brushing through her short hair. Her voice clear now. "Do you think I can start again?" He smiled. "I think you already have." And as they walked away from the ruins, side by side, no longer hunted, no longer alone, the sky opened wide above them, no longer a battlefield, but maybe, just maybe, a place where healing could begin.